Direct Selection tool, rectangles and other shapes. As I previously mentioned, shapes are vector layers native to Photoshop. This means you can draw any of these shapes and resize them without losing quality. The first question might be, what can you do with them? Believe it or not, just about anything. For example, in web design, we rely on these shapes for most of our elements. A rounded rectangle can become a button, a normal rectangle is a main menu, a line can act as a divider, and so on. Besides those, we also have custom shapes which can be accessed from this top panel here. I have lots of them downloaded from the web, but Photoshop comes with some pre-installed too. By using these, you save yourself the trouble of working with the pen tool, and these can be used in just about any situation. When you want to add a rectangle, you have to make sure you have this set at shape and the stroke is at none. That's what the red line means, no stroke. Also, you have to have a line edges checked because this assures Photoshop will position the element OK on its grid. To add a shape, you can simply click once and a dialog will appear asking you for the dimensions you want. This From Center option means the rectangle will originate from the exact point where you clicked it. In general though, I like to click and drag, and based on the on-screen measurements I can adjust its size. Starting with Photoshop CC, we have a great new feature available, the Live Shape Properties panel. This will open up immediately after you draw a shape, but you can also activate it from Window, Properties. Here you have a bunch of controls, and these work on rectangles and rounded rectangles. W stands for width, H stands for height. The chain between them signifies they are linked together, so if you click on it and you change one of them, the other will adjust accordingly, based on the aspect ratio you set. So if I initially have 100 pixels width and 50 pixels height and I have them linked, when I double the width, I'll also have double the height. Great stuff. X and Y represent the position on the canvas and you'll probably never use it. Next, you have the shape's color, but I recommend you double-click its thumbnail from the Layers panel if you want to adjust it. That's how I do it. Regarding the stroke, again, keep it at none because we have another option to add a stroke, a layer style, and we'll talk about those later on. These three buttons control the stroke as well, so we'll skip them. Here's where the magic happens. This feature tells us the roundness of the corners, and in our case it's at 0 because they're completely squared off. We can put 5 in the first one and you'll see the other 3 follow suit because we have them linked together by default. In case you want 5, 5, but 0, 0 for the bottom, unlink them and manually put your values in. I know this doesn't seem like a big deal, but this completely changed my workflow in my web design projects. If the client decided he wanted rounded corners instead of square ones, I'd have to redo the whole design. So this is a breath of fresh air. One thing to note is that you can hold down Shift after you've clicked to create a perfect square. This applies to the Ellipse tool as well. As you see, this is a perfect circle. You can also click, then hold down Alt and Shift so your shape will expand from the point of origin. This is basically the alternative of this From Center option. Try it a few times to make sure you understand the difference. OK. You can also combine your shapes to get new ones. First, you can overlap 2 shapes and hit Ctrl E. This is the Merge command, and it's also available if you right-click in the Layers panel. This creates a single layer from the 2, but note this is still a shape. That's because you can also combine the 2 by converting them into a smart object, for example. Now they're no longer shapes in your Layers panel. Far more accessible is the following. You draw one shape, then before you click, you hold down Shift. Now your cursor will have this plus symbol next to it. Before I continue, I have to remind you that you need to see these anchor points. If you don't, the Shift command won't work. To see those points, you can use the Direct Selection tool and select them like so. Alternatively, you can press Ctrl H, it's up to you. Both work fine, but you need to remember you need to do this first. Let me point out the difference again. If you want a perfect shape, you click and then you hold down Shift. If you want to add to a shape, you hold Shift and then you click. Make sense? Try it a few times and you'll see it's easy to get. OK. You can also subtract from a shape by holding down the Alt key. A minus symbol will appear letting you know that you're about to subtract from that shape. After you've clicked, you don't have to keep holding down the Alt key because that will cause your new shape to expand from that origin point. I know this may sound like a bit too much information for some of you, but I promise you'll understand them perfectly once you perform this lecture's exercise. Lastly, a command you'll rarely use is Alt and Shift before clicking. Your cursor will show an X symbol, and this means only the intersection of those shapes will remain visible. You might use it on some rare occasion, so that's that. Okay, moving on to the rounded rectangle tool, things are identical. Only difference is this corner radius from up top. I currently have it set at 15 pixels, but as you know, after you place your shape on the canvas, you can easily adjust it from the Live Shape Properties panel. I'd like to let you know that you can mass modify your layers. So if you have 3 rectangles with square edges, you can select them all from the Layers panel, select all their anchor points, and then change the radius. Again, selecting those points is crucial, otherwise it's not going to work. This is why I paired the Direct Selection tool with shapes. They go hand in hand. This is what the tool does. It selects anchor points and allows you to adjust them. Note that you don't need to select them all in one go. You can get 2 of them, then hold down Shift to get a third point from another part of the shape. Another important thing is that if you modify a rectangle by moving one of its anchor points, Photoshop will tell you that it will lose the ability of modifying it from this panel. It will be converted into a path, so it will lose its shape properties. As you can see, I now have density and feather instead of all those great options, so that's something to be aware of. The Ellipse tool doesn't have as many features because it doesn't have corners, yet you can still adjust its size, colour and stroke from this panel. All the other shortcuts apply, it's a shape like all the other ones. The Polygon tool is really great. This is how you create triangles fast. You use the controller up top to set the number of sides, in our case 3. Then you drag, and I like to hold down the Shift key so it's perfectly straight. Of course, after you've placed it, you can use the Direct Selection tool to modify it. You can press Enter to deselect the anchor points, then just grab one. Now with your Shift key you can extend it by 10 pixels. This is the beauty of it, you gain a lot of freedom. You can start off with a shape layer by using one of these tools, and then you can combine it with a rectangle by merging. On top of that, you can drag one of the anchor points, and then you can always place more by using the pen tool. So it's a mega combo that allows you to create an infinite number of shapes. Going back to the Polygon tool, you can click to get this window. And here you have more options. You can have smooth corners, you can create a star. Basically, you can control how it will look by fiddling with these settings. This is what 10% indent looks like. And this is 70%. Showing you is much easier than explaining it in this case. Going to the Line tool, this is just a thin rectangle. That's how I view it. That's why I always set its weight at 1 pixel. That's how it's useful. If I want it thicker, 3 or 4 pixels, then I'd much rather use a rectangle and adjust it with Ctrl-T. Now I can drag by these handles and get a line that has a perfect thickness. You've seen me use Ctrl-T throughout this course because it's one of those essential elements in Photoshop. There's not a lot to say about it other than it's awesome and that you should use it when it comes down to resizing shape layers. It can be used for other layer types too, like rasterized layers or smart objects, but I wouldn't use it on text layers because it makes the font size have strange values like the one you see here. Use the character panel instead. One thing you need to know about it is how you can modify the dimensions from here. Initially, the size is set in percentages, but if you right-click, you can change that to pixels, and it becomes easier to get precise dimensions. Back to the Line tool, besides using Shift to keep it straight, all the other features I described apply, like holding Shift to add to it, or holding Alt to subtract from it, and so on. Lastly on our list is the Custom Shapes tool, which you already got a glimpse of. After you select it, you click on this region, and this area will expand. If yours isn't as big, just go to the edge and drag it. If you don't see any elements, go to this small icon and choose All. You'll be asked if you want to replace or append. Remember, append means you will add to your existing list. When you use one of these shapes, I recommend you click, drag and hold down Shift. Otherwise your shape is not going to look right. It'll be deformed. Shift maintains the aspect ratio. Some of these shapes started out either as rectangles or ellipses that were then modified, or they were made from scratch using the pen tool. Remember, it's one of the main functions of it. In case you create something very nice, you can go to Edit, Define custom shape. Just make sure you have those points selected, otherwise it's not going to work. A dialog box will ask you for its name, and after you've hit OK, you'll have it in your list. As with everything else, from this panel you can reset your list, save it, load it, or replace it. You might want to revisit this lecture at least one more time before you jump onto the next exercise, but I promise after you've practiced a bit, you'll get them immediately. 1. Transform this rectangle into a rounded rectangle. This is only for those with Photoshop CC and Photoshop CC 2014. Then resize it to 300 by 150 pixels. If you have CS6, you can still do the second part. 2. Transform these 3 rectangles into rounded rectangles in one go. This only applies to CC users. 3. Set the top corners at 0 pixel radius, so squared, and make the bottom ones have a 20 pixel radius. This is still just for the CC users, but don't worry, you still have other things to do. 4. Overlap the 3 rectangles and merge them with Ctrl-E. Find out what determines what colour the new shape will be. 5. Create a perfect rectangle, a square. Then add another rectangle with the Shift key, then remove part of it with the Alt key. 6. Create a rectangle from the point of origin by using Alt and Shift together. 7. Create a pencil-like shape with a rectangle and a triangle. It must be in one layer. Then save it as a custom shape. 8. Create a star with 5 sharp edges. Have fun! Marquee tool. The rectangular marquee is one of the most used tools in my day-to-day work, whether it's image retouching, web design, or creating mobile apps. Let me break it down in a simple way. The hotkey is M. Click and drag and you'll have a rectangular selection. Do that again and a new selection will appear. To deselect, use Ctrl-D. This is critical because if you have a selection active, the amount of tools you can use will be limited. How do you know you have a selection active? You look for these marching ants. If you see them anywhere and you don't know how they got there, just press Ctrl-D. I'd go as far as to say that if Photoshop's tools are behaving strangely, you can hit Ctrl-D just to be safe there isn't a very tiny selection somewhere on the canvas. Great, let's move on. The icons at the top really describe the multiple functions of the marquee tool. Currently, we're on the default one, which simply makes a new selection. If we select the second one, that will add to our selection. Notice the plus symbol that appeared on our cursor. Click and drag and you will add. The next setting subtracts from our selection. Notice the minus symbol. All of these are similar with the shape layer tools that we just covered. The last one is intersect, and it's best understood if you see it in action. So create a normal selection, then press on that option and now drag somewhere inside it. Now only the area that intersects with the initial selection will remain. Very easy to understand once you use it. In general, I leave the marquee at its default setting, and if I want to use the other options, I use my hotkeys. So while on the marquee tool, hold Shift for the second function, adding the selection. Hold Alt for the third setting, subtracting from the selection. Lastly, to intersect, hold both Shift and Alt. I know these may seem a lot, but you'll quickly see you don't need to memorize them. A great option Photoshop has introduced is to show you the size of your selection while you drag. W stands for width and H for height. So if you know you want a 300 by 400 pixel selection, you could use it like that. Mostly though, this comes in handy when you need to measure things fast. The feather option isn't something I generally recommend because you can achieve the same effect in a more controlled fashion. In any case, feathering is softening the edge of your selection by making the edge gradually fade out until it blends with the background. This is opposed to being sharp. Let me show you. Normal selection, sharp edges. I'll fill it with colour with Shift F5, and it's what you expect, a solid rectangle filled with a colour. Set the feather at 20 pixels. Fill it, and it will have this transition. So use it only when you need soft edges that fade away. Another setting is fixed ratio. For example, 1:1 will make it a perfect square. If you want to achieve the same result, simply hold Shift while dragging. That's what I recommend. Fixed size is when you know exactly the dimensions you're going for. Simply click and that will create a selection based on your input. So if I put it 100 by 100 and click, it will give me just that. This is great for those cases where you want precision, but again, I recommend you keep this setting at normal. Another thing is this. Use Alt to expand from the point from where you clicked and use Alt and Shift to drag a perfect square. Again, exactly like using the shape tools. Okay, so we covered all these things and you still don't know what you can do with the marquee tool, right? Well, let's see. When you're on a layer and you create a selection like this, if you move to the Move tool and drag, you'll see you'll cut that part out of the image. This works only on rasterized layers. That may be useful if you want to work on a certain area alone. For example, maybe I want to remove the background from this house. Well, the first step is to cut down on everything around it, and the marquee tool helps me do that. An alternative I often use is this. I create a selection and then I use Ctrl-J to duplicate. Now my original layer is intact, but I have this copy of this region alone. So I can hide the initial layer and only work on this small part. Going back, another thing I can do is paint without worrying I might go outside this region. As you can see, nothing happens when I'm outside the selection. Only when I paint inside it, the color actually changes. With the same selection, I can use a ton of adjustment layers. I know we haven't covered them in depth, but let me show you the concept. I'll click on this small icon at the bottom of the Layers panel for an adjustment layer. Now you'll see it appear in my Layers panel, and we have several controls here. I can adjust the hue, the saturation. Either way I want to go, change the lightness, you name it. So you get the idea. The marquee tool, by creating a selection, isolates that part of the layer. Then you can cut it out, make a copy of it, or modify it with all the tools Photoshop has to offer. So that's the rectangular marquee tool in a nutshell. It's a really important one because it allows you to make fast selections on the canvas and it prevents you from overflowing into other areas that you want to leave as is. Please make a note of something. Previously in the course, we talked about selecting a layer from the canvas, selecting in the Layers panel, but now we're talking about selections in a whole different way. That's because, unfortunately, we have the same word for two different things. So I can select a layer in the Layers panel by clicking it. I can also make a selection on that layer on the canvas. I know it may seem confusing, but based on the context, you will be able to figure out which is which. Give it time and you'll figure out the difference, even though it might frustrate you a bit at the moment. So again, you can make a selection with the marquee tool, but you can select a layer from the Layers panel or from the canvas with the Control-Click method. Don't confuse the two. And that's the rectangular marquee tool. We have other selection tools and options, and we'll go through them one by one. One thing to note is that all selection tools have the same purpose, to isolate a part of the layer on the canvas so you can work only on that region. When you try to do the same on a smart object, a shape layer or a text layer, you'll see it won't work. All these selections must be made on rasterized layers. If you don't know the difference, there's a lecture about the different layer types Photoshop has to offer. There's no particular exercise here, just use the image you have attached to the lecture and go through the same steps I did. Have fun! Elliptical Marquee Tool. The Elliptical Marquee Tool has the same functions as the rectangular marquee. To select it, use Shift-M to switch to it. An option it has over the rectangular marquee is the anti-aliasing. I recommend you always have that checked. That's the smoothing of the edges, and it doesn't apply to straight ones like the rectangular marquee tool creates. So to see the difference, first you'll create a circle with the anti-aliasing off. Hold Shift to have it perfectly round, then use Shift F5 to fill it with black. Remember, you can also go to Edit, Fill. OK, now repeat the process, but first check the anti-aliasing option up top. Now zoom in to see the difference. One has jagged edges, the other has smoother edges. 99% of the time you'll want the second option, so keep anti-aliasing checked. The difficulty in using the elliptical marquee is guessing where to start. If I want to select this area, I need to go somewhere in the upper left, though I'm not sure where. I have to constantly hit Ctrl-D to deselect and then remake my selection. Here's what you can do. Go to the upper left and drag. Don't let go and hold space. Now you can move your selection and position it. Align it in one place, for example the top of the left side. Let go of space and expand your selection some more. Then again, hold space and move it into place. This is the best way to go about it, and it helps a lot with round objects. An alternative, though not as effective, is to approximate where the center is and then use Alt, Shift and drag. This will make your selection expand from the point where you clicked. It's a bit difficult to hold the spacebar as well, but that's the other option you have. So again, take your best guess where the center of the object is, then click and drag. Now hold Alt and Shift. Alt makes the selection expand from the point of origin, and Shift helps you create a perfect circle. Now with these two pressed, you hold the spacebar as well. So you'll hold 3 keys down in total. Now you can reposition it. When you're happy, let go of the spacebar first, then release the mouse click. There's a big difference here. If you make your selection let go and then press space, you'll navigate on your canvas. If you make a selection and press space, you'll move it around. The rest of the features are identical to the rectangular marquee tool. You'll have this image attached so you can practice as many times as you want. Have fun! Lasso tools. The lasso tool is something that can help you make a rough selection fast. The hotkey is L, and you have 2 other lassos available underneath. We'll talk about them all, but let's take it step by step. The regular lasso tool works sort of like a pencil. You grab it and then you draw anywhere on the canvas to make a selection. It doesn't offer any particular options other than anti-aliasing, which should always be turned on, and the feather option that creates soft edges. We talked about that in the marquee lecture. So what's the point of it? When you drag on your canvas, you can't use the Shift key to create straight lines, nor do you have any other great features. Yes, you can use the same hotkeys like for the marquee tool, Shift to add to the selection, Alt to subtract to the selection, and Shift and Alt to get only the intersection. This doesn't appear to be much, and indeed it isn't, and that's because in most real scenarios you'll never use just one selection tool. This is why we have a special chapter on this subject. All those tools intertwine with each other. You create a rectangular selection with the marquee tool, then you jump in with the lasso tool to remove parts of it, and so on. So the lasso tool is used to quickly pick something up from the canvas, isolate it from the rest of the image, and work on it with other selection tools. It's not meant for precision, it's aimed for speed, but keep in mind you'll most likely never use it by itself, no matter how steady your hand is. Going over to the polygonal lasso tool. This has the exact same features as the normal lasso, anti-aliasing and feather, but it has better precision because it relies on clicks. This is great when you have straight objects like the building we have here. At any point I can click and change my direction, but notice there's no give, we only have straight lines. So if your object has any curves, this is not the ideal tool for the job. Still, this is very fast and kind of precise, which is a pretty good combination in most cases. This can be used by itself, but in general you might need to use a few other features to get a perfect result. A thing to notice, don't confuse the polygonal lasso with the polygon tool. They're 2 completely different things. Okay, moving on to the magnetic lasso tool. This is actually a fantastic thing. Immediately we get more features at the top, and those control the tool's behavior. First, let's see it in action. I'll click and I'll start hovering over the edge of this building. It's critical you understand I'm not clicking at all. I clicked once for my initial point, now I'm just moving my mouse. Photoshop is automatically adding these anchor points based on the frequency I set up top. The higher I raise it, the more anchor points I'm going to get. Why is that important? Well, if the shape is complicated, more anchor points will result in a better selection. If I think Photoshop isn't placing the right amount or in the right places, I can click myself to add a few. Plus, if I somehow mess things up and I don't want to start over, I can just press the backspace key. This will delete your last anchor point and you can continue on the correct line. As with all selections, you need to go back around to the original point and close it off. You'll see the cursor will change its appearance. Fun thing is, you can go really fast, and if the image is fairly clear, Photoshop will still do a great job. If the image is washed out, you may need to ramp up the contrast. Regarding the width, that's the area where Photoshop looks for the edge. It's usually a good idea to leave it at around 10 pixels. That's the magnetic lasso tool, a great option for making fast selections with a fairly high accuracy. All these lasso tools will probably be used less than the other selection options because the ones that follow are very clever, fast and accurate. Still, you have this image attached, so I recommend you try to use the polygonal and magnetic lassos to select a building. Then press Ctrl-J and put it on a white background so you can see how well you did. Have fun! Quick selection and magic wand. We've arrived at the two most powerful selection tools Photoshop has to offer. The Marquee tool is great, but it's like a jack for your car. It's there for support, it's not the main actor. The Lasso tool with all its friends is cool, but it lacks refinement and/or speed. But here we're going to talk about the Quick Selection tool and the Magic Wand. These are the go-to guys when it comes down to selections. Let's see them in action. First, the Quick Selection tool. The hotkey is W. Underneath it we have the Magic Wand, but we'll get to that later. This acts like a brush, if you will. You click and you drag over the element you want selected. And as you can see, the selection quickly expands, and it's actually doing an amazing job. It's also dead easy to use. Up top, we need to have Auto Enhance checked, and that's about it. We can use the square bracket keys to adjust the brush size, so there's no need to fiddle around this menu. What's great is that you can use Shift to add to your selection. But if Photoshop goes too far, you can hold down Alt and the program will immediately know that it should disregard that area. This is what I use the most in my selection work. The Quick Selection tool can't be praised enough. It's fast, it's accurate, and it's very easy to use. Just click and drag over your desired area and see results instantly. This leaves the Lasso tools in the dust. Let's jump over to the Magic Wand tool. It's underneath the Quick Selection tool, so we can use Shift W for that, or we can click and hold. Remember to use Ctrl D to deselect. With it, we can click once and get a nice selection. Now, the results vary a lot. In our case here, it's going to be very tricky to pull off a great selection. That's because the Magic Wand tool uses Photoshop's algorithms to figure out what pixels go together. Here, with the secondary flower in the background, that becomes a bit of a pain. What's important to know is that each time you click, you reset your selection. So if you want to add or subtract from it, you have to use your Shift and Alt keys, otherwise you're wasting time. Shift adds while Alt subtracts. The tolerance is critical for this tool. This tells Photoshop how loosely it should look for matching pixels. If you put a value that's too low, you'll have to click lots of times with the Shift key. If you raise it up a lot, you'll grab too many pixels. In general, a starting tolerance of 30 is pretty good, but as you can see, I'm still having a hard time here. We did this selection in under 5 seconds with the Quick Selection tool, but here I'm struggling. But if we move over to another image, you'll see how magic this tool actually is. It takes only 1, maybe 2 clicks to select this entire sky, or 1 click to get one of these buildings. So what does that mean for you? Every situation must be handled the easiest way possible. You can use the pen tool, the marquee tools, the lassos, or these two I just showed you. You have to decide which one is best for the job, and that's easier than you think. You start off with one of them and see how it goes. If you're having a hard time, just deselect and start over with the new tool. That's what I want you to understand more than any hotkey or feature. Use your judgment to decide what's best for your particular image. You may be in love with the Quick Selection tool, but that doesn't mean you should only use that for all your work. It's situation dependent. We're covering all these tools, and I'll show you several examples so you understand the thought process and the techniques. Not to copy my exact steps, oh, it's an image with a sky, so I'll use the Quick Selection tool because that's what Chris used. It doesn't work that way. You have to gain the freedom in your decisions, and for that you must understand the theory, then apply your own judgment. Great, I hope I got that point across. It's vital you understand it. Let's move on to the next lecture. The pen tool. We've already seen the pen tool in action when we created shapes with it. Now we can use it for its second function, creating selections. We'll use this flower because it's a great way to practice your skills. It's going to be a bit tricky at the start, but if you do this exercise 10 times, you'll get the hang of the pen tool, no problem. Before we start, I want to brighten up the background so you can see things better. I'll use an adjustment layer for that. I'll click on this icon and I'll choose Brightness Contrast. From this new panel that popped up, I'll take the first slider up to 150. Now we can see things much better. Now let's grab the pen tool and make sure you're on the path setting from the top left. Okay, let's start from the bottom and work our way up. This is going to require quite a bit of attention to detail, so make sure you have 10 minutes put aside for this. Zoom in and set your first point at the bottom. It can even be outside the canvas, it doesn't matter. Now go up, click and drag. You want to go upwards because this will mimic the curvature of the flower. Keep holding the mouse click and move left to right until you find the best angle. Also use your spacebar to move up once you're ready to move on to the next section. Remember, Ctrl Z is your friend. If you mess up, just go back. Also, if you want a straight line after the last anchor point you set, hold down the Alt key and hover over it. As you can see, the mouse cursor changes and you should see this arrow. Now, instead of having a curved line, you'll get a perfectly straight one. This will help a lot when the curvature of the plant changes. It's up to you how many anchor points you want to set, but ideally the less you have, the smoother the effect will be. If you set too many, you'll have choppy lines, no question about it. The thing is that you don't have to be incredibly precise on your first go. You can get accustomed to it on your first try. That's not to say you should leave your selection looking like a mess. Remember, we can always hold down the Control key to access the Direct Selection tool and adjust everything. We can move a point inwards or outwards. We can also adjust the handles. Just take your time with it and use the same options like you were making a shape layer. So Control and Alt are your friends. This is going to take a while, so I'll speed up the video just a little bit. Know that I'm clicking and dragging in most cases, and I'm using Alt to set the next line straight. After you've gone full circle, close the selection by looking for this symbol on your cursor. Now you need to right-click and choose Make Selection. Only now you're finally done and you can do whatever you want with it. In my case, I want to duplicate it with Ctrl-J. Now I'll switch to the Move tool and I'll put it on the left side of the screen. That's the pen tool for selection work. Of course, we could have used other tools for the job, but the pen tool, once mastered, can give you far better results than all the other options. Please practice at least a few times with this image. Have fun! Refine Edge and Masking. The Refine Edge command is available for all your selection tools, and it's the last button on this top panel. After you've made your initial selection, this helps you get a better result by using all these remarkable options. Let's explore them. First, we have several viewing modes that allow us to better see our selection. Depending on your case, you may want to see it on a transparent background, on white, on black, and so on. This is really helpful because it shows you all those small imperfections you might not see with all the background noise. In our case, on white, we see how the top part is really jagged. All those rough edges make this selection sloppy. We can cycle through them at any point, so we have a better idea of our work. Let's get started. This edge detection is amazing. Turn the Smart Radius option on and raise up the value. As we go up, you get to see the details come in. All those feathers that were lost are now coming back in. Keep in mind I'm going to exaggerate these controls just so those that aren't viewing in HD can see what they do. If you want to toggle the before and after, we have this Show Original option at the top. This makes it easy to see how far we've come. So this first option is amazing for hair, fur, and other textures that need close attention. Underneath, we can adjust the edge in several ways. Smoothing, it does just that, but to illustrate it, I'm going to remove what I previously did and I'll zoom in really close. As you can see, this makes a world of difference. Please note that all these values that I'm going to put in depend on your image size and on your selection, so there's no point in remembering these values, they'll vary a lot in your work. OK, I'm going to zoom out with Ctrl-0 and I'll put in the edge detection again. Something like 40 pixels will be OK, and for the smoothing I'll put in 30 pixels. We already covered feathering. It creates a smoother transition between your selection and your background pixels. Here I'll use a value of 5. It's not going to change a whole lot, but the effect is there. Contrast will really change the outcome because it will make everything that much crisper. As you can see, the blurriness has gone away and we're now getting close to what we want. Finally, we can contract or expand the selection with this Shift Edge. If we go -20%, you'll see it eats up into everything we've done so far to keep those extra details. So we'll go with +10%. Finally, if we had a colourful background, we could have used this Decontaminate Colours option. This happens when you use all these settings and your selection isn't perfect. The colour of the background bleeds into eagle, thus giving it a coloured stroke, if you will. Finally, we get to decide what we want to do with all our work. We can simply have an updated selection, for example, or we can have this on a new layer, which would eliminate the step of using Ctrl-J to duplicate. All these options are fine, depending on what you want to do, but the layer mask is what interests me. Look what happens. The background becomes transparent, and we have a new icon in our Layers panel. This allows us to further work on this eagle. Before that, make a note of the following. I have the brush tool with all the settings set on normal and with black as my foreground colour. It's one thing to paint over the layer, like so, and it's another thing to paint over my mask, like so. This is a critical step. You have to click on what you want to work on and then proceed, because the mask changes things. So what can you do? Well, white adds, while black removes. So if we wanted to get rid of some of these feathers here, we could get black as the foreground colour, lower the opacity and the hardness, and start painting. As you see, the result is pretty good. If we went too far, we could switch to white with the X key and paint the details back in. This is really powerful because it allows you to have a relaxed approach on things. If you've missed something, just paint it in, and vice versa. So that's about it regarding selections. What's going to happen next is I'm going to perform some selections in real-world scenarios in order to get some nice effects. We have a whole chapter on that, so that's where you'll get to practice your selections. I believe that's the best way to learn, by doing real-world cases. Let's get to it. How to whiten teeth. Let me show you how you can improve your smile through Photoshop within minutes. First, we're going to grab the lasso tool and make a selection. I'm using it because I want you to use it too. It's a bit more difficult, but we'll manage. Notice I've zoomed in and I'm working fairly sloppily. That's because I can always use Shift to add to my selection or Alt to subtract from it. This is quite a difficult task, but if you have to do it with the lasso tool a few times, that's going to be perfect for you. I could have selected an easier photo, or I could have used the quick selection tool, but we are here to learn. After we have all the tools understood and under our complete control, then we can take the easy way out. Right, now my selection is completed. What I'll first do is click on the Refine Edge button from up above. I need to feather my selection so the effect will appear natural. About 1.5 pixels should be enough. Next, I'll go to the bottom of the Layers panel and click on this icon. From here, I'll choose Selective Colour. This is an adjustment layer that will allow me to remove some of that yellow from the teeth. So that's what I'm going to choose from this drop-down, yellow. Now I'll move this slider all the way down. If we toggle this layer's visibility, you'll see it already made an improvement. Before we go any further, I've got to say that I want natural looking teeth and the change has to be subtle. If you plan on using this for your Facebook images, please do it my way. There's a bunch of other tutorials out there that make your smile Hollywood-like, yet I feel that's too big of a change. I want subtle improvement, not a completely different smile. With that said, let's proceed to step number 2. I need my selection again, but don't worry, you don't have to grab the lasso tool and redo the same job. Instead, we'll go to Select, Reselect. This is absolutely golden because it saves us a lot of time. Now I'll choose another adjustment layer, Levels. Here you don't need to worry too much about all these details. I'll move this middle slider to the left side, around 1.30 or so, and this will get me a great yet subtle result. On your image, you may need more, you may need less. Work with these sliders and constantly check the result. If we hide these adjustment layers to see the initial image, we can see we've made a big difference and it's still believable. Just in case you've selected bits from the lip or gum area, you can click on the Levels mask and paint with a small black brush. The hardness should be at 100%. Now you can paint over any of those excess areas you've selected by mistake. So that's how you improve teeth. 1. Make a selection. 2. Use the Selective Colour Adjustment layer and drag down the yellow slider. 3. Reselect and use the Levels Adjustment layer to control their brightness. There are other ways of achieving the same effect, this is just one of them. I might include other versions in a later update of this course. In the meantime, please practice, especially the selection with the lasso tool. Have fun! Enhance lips naturally. This is one of the easiest things you can do, but it's still a powerful effect. Grab the Quick Selection tool and make a selection of the lip area. This time we're not going to refine the edge and you'll soon see why. Next, we'll get an adjustment layer from the bottom of the Layers panel. Choose Hue and Saturation. Now simply raise the saturation. Plus 30 to plus 40 should be more than enough. If you zoom in, you'll see the selection wasn't perfect, so in some places we have some gaps and in other places we have a bit of an overflow. To fix it, get the Brush tool. Use black to remove the effect and white to add to it. In this case, I want to use a soft brush. so make sure the hardness is set at 0%. To adjust the brush size, remember to use your square bracket keys on your keyboard. Now, paint over the problematic areas, take your time, and that's it. It's a very straightforward effect. Of course, there are other ways of doing it, but like I said in the previous video, I want you to learn the basics before you get into anything too crazy. A few things before you go. In case you don't want to use the Select, Reselect menu item, you can always hold down the Control key and click on this layer's thumbnail. Now you've re-engaged that selection. This is great because if you accidentally make another selection, that Reselect option becomes unusable. And this was a fast job. The Quick Selection tool performed brilliantly. But if you have a very complicated task that requires 30 minutes of working intensely, how do you protect yourself? Well, it's easy. First, you have to have your document saved. Next, I go to Select, Save Selection. A new window will appear asking how you want to save it. Put in a name and that's it. You don't need to worry about the other options. Now we can close this document. In general, if we hadn't done that step, the selection would have been lost. That's how Photoshop works. It doesn't automatically save it. But in our case, we can open the PSD file again, we can go to the Select menu and click on Load Selection. Notice we have it here in this drop-down. Click OK, and there you go. Great stuff. Now it's your turn. Grab the Quick Selection tool and select the lips. Then use a hue and saturation adjustment layer. Raise the saturation at around +30 to +40. Then while on the mask, paint with a soft brush over the problematic areas. Also try out the Control-Click technique on the thumbnail and save a selection in your PSD file. Practice makes perfect. Have fun. Add detail to your image. This is a simple two-step technique that will dramatically improve your images without having to spend hours slaving away in Photoshop. At the bottom of the Layers panel, go to this icon and add an adjustment layer. Select Hue Saturation. We've used it several times so far, so you should be used to it. In the new panel that popped up, bring the saturation all the way down. Now it's basically black and white. We had another adjustment layer that did virtually the same thing, but I wanted you to see it this way. Now, go to the top of the Layers panel and change the blending mode to Soft Light. This is our first step, and the image already has an interesting look to it. Now select your image layer and make a copy with Ctrl-J. Check your Layers panel to make sure that's the case. You might have noticed that when I copy a layer, I don't get that layer named to whatever copy, instead I just get the name. Well, if you want to turn that off like I did, you have to go to the Layers panel options. You do that by clicking on this very tiny icon. Remember, most panels have it, and you usually find interesting settings there. From here, you uncheck the last option, and that's it. Easy. Great. Now going back on topic, we'll go to Image, Adjustments, Shadows, Highlights. I already have these settings set up as the default, and as you can see, the image looks significantly better. If your Photoshop doesn't jump to any settings, try the ones I have here and then adjust them until the image looks right. Quick recap in case you don't see everything. For the shadows, 35% amount, 50% tonal width, radius 30px. For the highlights, amount 0%, tonal width 50%, radius 30px. Adjustments, color correction +20. And that's it. Then you can press Save as Defaults so you can reuse it with ease. The result is a nice image with loads more details. Let's toggle these two layers so we can check the original version. That's pretty bland. The colors are faded, and with all that sand, we don't focus immediately on what's important. Now with this simple two-step process, we get more depth, more color, and overall a nicer image. Try it out on some of your photos, but make sure you adjust those settings in the Shadows Highlights panel. You also have this image attached, so have fun. Add focus to a specific area with light. In order to bring attention to a certain part of your image, we're going to do the following. First, go to the bottom of the Layers panel and add an adjustment layer by pressing on this icon. You already know this by now, but there's a twist. Now we're going to select Curves. From the new panel that appears, from the center, raise the line up significantly. This will brighten up the image dramatically. Now press Ctrl-I, and this will invert the mask. What does this mean? Before, everything was affected by the adjustment layer. Now, with the inversion, nothing is. But it's not useless, far from it. Select the brush tool and make sure you have the hardness set at 0% and the opacity under 50%. Having white as the foreground colour, start painting on the area you want to brighten up. In our case, it's the couple. Sometimes, depending on your background and on your brush hardness, you may end up having a lousy effect. Don't worry, after you're all set painting, double-click on your adjustment layer's thumbnail and press on this small icon here. Make sure you have your mask selected by clicking it, otherwise this whole panel will be unlit. Now drag the feather slider up. How much really depends on the image size, the opacity and the hardness of the brush you've painted with. Here in my case it doesn't make a significant difference, but I wanted to show you this step as a precautionary measure if nothing else. The second step is to add another curves adjustment layer, but this time make it darker. What's really nice is that you don't have to worry about getting it right the first time. These layers can always be adjusted by double-clicking on their thumbnail, so if something's too powerful you can easily tone it down a bit. Here I'm going to exaggerate the effect so those that don't have the option of watching in high definition can still see what's going on. Great, now we have a second curves layer. Press Ctrl-I to invert it again. Paint with white around the edges of the couple to make a really nice effect. Make sure you adjust your brush size to get the best result. I always use my square brackets on my keyboard. I'll go just about everywhere around them, even a little bit on the sun. If you go too far, press X and paint with black to remove some of the effect. After that's set, you can always adjust both the lightness of the girl or the darkness of the edges by simply double-clicking and moving the line around. But you can also lower the opacity of your layers. I like to use my 1 through 0 keys on my keyboard. 1 stands for 10%, 2 for 20% and so on. 0 goes back to 100% opacity. Great, now let's see the before and after. Quite a big difference and in only a few steps. Remember to dial it down, you don't need too much to get a nice effect. I can't stress that enough. If it's too obvious it's been photoshopped, it really takes a lot away from it. You want to slightly enhance, not completely redo the image. Go have some fun with this technique. Add focus to a specific area with blur. We saw how you can direct someone's attention by using light in your image. Now we have an alternative, blur. First, we start off with duplicating the image, which is optional, but I'd rather you pick up this habit than not. I always use Ctrl-J for that. Next, we'll right-click on it and we'll select Convert to Smart Object. We do that not because we want to resize the image and we want to maintain its quality. No, instead we're going to use a filter from this filter panel up top. When you're working with smart objects, all these options from this panel will appear underneath your layer, exactly like a layer style effect. But instead of having drop shadow or inner glow, you'll have the filters you chose. If you apply a filter to a regular raster image, you'll get the effect, but it won't be editable. As you can see here, the image changed, but there's nothing in the layers panel. So to sum it up, whenever you use any of these options, convert your layer into a smart object first. Okay, from this panel we'll choose Blur, Surface Blur. A new window will appear, and what's great about this is the preview option. When you have it checked, you get to see how the image will look. This is really helpful. Regarding the settings, I'll use a radius of 20 pixels and a threshold of 40 levels. I don't have a non-boring explanation of these sliders, but I'll tell you this, the more you increase the values, the more fairy tale the image is going to look. So it's up to you how far you want to take it, but it also depends on the image surroundings. Here we have quite a lot of things that need to be blurred out, so when someone's looking at the image, they can be immediately drawn to the couple. Makes sense. After you hit OK, you can see the effect is underneath our layer. Again, this happens because we converted it to a smart object beforehand. Now, if the blur settings aren't OK, I can double-click and adjust them. Also, I can always toggle the visibility by clicking on this eye icon here. Great, now you probably know what's next. We're going to use a mask so the effect will apply only to the background. Take note, previously we added a mask and we inverted it with Ctrl-I. In this case, I'm going to hold down the Alt key or Option on a Mac and click on the button. This will make an inverted mask from the get-go. Now with a white brush, fairly large, you can paint over the background. Remember to use your square bracket keys to adjust the brush size. Take your time and go over all those details in the background that need to be softened up. Again, if this is too much or too little for you, simply adjust the amount of surface blur. A simple effect to learn that has a high impact on your vacation photos. You have this image attached, but feel free to use this technique on your own photos, maybe somewhere where you're in a crowd perhaps. Have fun! Making a colour stand out. This is yet another easy, high-impact effect we're going to go through. I hope you're getting the hang of this and that you're enjoying it so far. Here, we're going to make the whole image black and white, and we'll leave one colour to stand out. That's going to be the red in the lighthouse. This is quite a popular look, and you'll find tons of images like this, so let's get started. We're first going to use the Quick Selection tool to select these 3 rings. This is a great exercise for your selection work. Take your time with it and be patient. Remember to use the Alt or Option key on a Mac to remove those unnecessary parts. You'll see this takes a bit of time even though the image is quite big. The result doesn't have to be perfect because, as you're probably already guessing, we'll use a mask afterwards. Why am I using them so much? Because they allow you to work on an image in a non-destructive way, so it doesn't mess with the original pixels, and it also gives you room for error. If you don't make a perfect selection, you can just paint over those problematic parts, and that's it. Okay, we've selected these 3 rings, and now we're going to right-click and choose Select Inverse. This can also be done from the Select menu from up top. Select Inverse. Why did we do that? Well, it's easier to work for a few minutes on these rings rather than selecting everything on the canvas except them. Sometimes it makes sense to work the other way around. Next, I'm going to add an adjustment layer, black and white. And as you can see, everything has been desaturated except for our rings. So remember the thought process here. I wanted everything to be black and white, but instead of using a bunch of tools to select the sky, the pier and the sea and so on, I decided to take the easier approach and reverse my selection. Now the image is much more interesting, but we're not done. We can use the brush tool for the top part as well. This needs a small brush with the hardness set at 100%. The opacity should be at the same level too. Now take your time to get all the red parts to show up in your image. Don't get anything that shouldn't be there though. And that's pretty much it. Make sure you perform this exercise a few times so you get the hang of it. Have fun! How to add digital makeup. I should point out from the get-go that I know nothing about adding makeup in real life. That's obviously going to affect the outcome of this image, but please be kind. This is something I recently picked up, and I think it's a useful technique for girls who want to try out different types of makeup without having to spend hours in real life. That being said, let's see how we'd go about it in Photoshop. The first step is to add an adjustment layer. We're looking for Channel Mixer. In the new panel that appeared, make these settings. For all 3 colours, have them at 0, 0, plus 70%. Click on the output channel to switch from red to green and blue. The other settings can remain as they are, but these 3 colours have to be set at 0, 0, plus 70%. Okay, the result is a muted image. We've lost all colour in it. Now press Ctrl-I to invert the mask. Get the brush tool and have these settings. Hardness 50%, small size with white as the foreground. Now paint in the eyeliner. Again, I don't have any experience in this field, but I'm sure girls can achieve a superb result with this technique. Ideally, a tablet would work wonders here, but with a steady hand and by flipping your colours constantly, you can get something that looks pretty good, I don't know. Again, just in case you mess up, press Ctrl-Z to undo or hit X to flip your colours and paint over your mistakes. So let's say this is the eyeliner. Now for the top part, which I'm sure has a name of its own, add another Channel Mixer adjustment layer. Here we'll have a bunch of settings, but they're pretty easy to get. For the red output channel, we're going to use 0, 0, 100%. For the green output channel, we'll have the exact same settings, 0, 0, 100%. For the blue one, we'll have it the other way around, 100%, 0, 0. The result looks pretty strange, but again, press Ctrl-I to invert. Grab a brush, adjust your size, and I'd say a soft one would probably get you the best results. Here it's a matter of working with all these combined. Adjust the opacity, the size, the flow, the hardness, everything. I know it's quite important not to touch the eyebrow, and while you're painting towards the inside, you have to shrink your brush constantly. I have no idea if this is okay or not, but by zooming out, you can get a better idea. I think that if you know what you want to do, this technique will surely help. I'm going to leave it like that, though I'm pretty sure it won't win any awards. We have one extra step just in case you want to play with the colour. Go to the red channel and play with these settings. I've turned down the red all the way to -200% and the result is too bright, but I can switch over to the Move tool by pressing V and I'll lower the layer's opacity to 50% and now it looks more natural. We can also move it up to +100% and we'll get a peach pink colour. That's it. I hope this will come in handy for those of you who are into experimenting with makeup in Photoshop. Have fun!